Hello and welcome. This VPAL signature event is brought to you by Harvard's Office of the Vice Provost for Advances in Learning in partnership with the Harvard Alumni Association. I'm pleased to welcome our speaker this evening, Rick Weisbord, Senior Lecturer at the Harvard Graduate School of Education and the Kennedy School of Government. Rick's work focuses on moral development, the nature of hope, vulnerability, and resilience in childhood, parenting, and effective schools and services for children. He directs the Making Caring Common project, a national effort to make moral and social development priorities in child raising and to provide strategies to schools and parents for promoting in children caring, a commitment to justice, and other key moral and social capacities. Without further ado, Rick, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you, Cassie. I'm delighted to be here. I'm sorry we're not in person. And thank you for your interest in this topic. I do want to talk to you, as Cassie said, about how we prepare children and young people to lead moral and meaningful lives. And let me just tell you the plan for today. I'm going to start with two problems. And one of the problems is, I think, the demoting of caring and morality in our public life and in our child raising. And the second problem is a lack of meaning and purpose in young people. And I'm going to share with you some statistics about the lack of meaning and purpose in young people. And I think these problems are related, and I think the solutions are related. After I talk about the problems, I'm going to pause because I want to hear any questions that you have. And then we're going to shift to solutions. And I want to share some thoughts with you about cultivating caring and morality and meaning and purpose in teens and young people. So let me start with the demoting of morality and how we got here. And what I mean by the demoting of morality is the degree to which there is meanness and antagonism in our culture, the degree to which there is lying in our culture, hyperpolarization, antagonism, hostility on social media. I really do not want this to be a partisan talk, but we just had a presidential election where I felt like ethical character didn't matter, was not a big factor in people's decisions. And that was very troubling to me. And so the question I want to encourage us to think about is, how do we get here and how do we get out of here? How do we make ethical character front and center again in child raising, and much more front and center again in our public life? So one of the questions that we have been asking over the last few years, actually 10 years now, is how much do kids and parents prioritize caring? How much is this a priority in our families, in our schools, in our communities? But let me just start with teens and parents. And we've surveyed 2013 over 10,000 diverse middle and high school students from every region of the country. And by now, we probably surveyed 50,000 middle and high school students. And basically, our findings have been consistent. And the question we've been asking these teens is, what's most important to you? Being happy, achieving at a high level, or caring for other people? We also ask them, how do you imagine your parents would rank these priorities for you? Is it more important to your parents that you're caring, that you're high achieving, or that you're happy? And we've asked parents too, what's most important to you in child raising? There's a lot of data here, but in a nutshell, this is what we found. That about almost 50% of teenagers ranked achievement first, happiness second, and at 30%, caring third at 20%. In other surveys, it's been more like 40% achievement, 40% happiness. But in either case, about 80% of teenagers are ranking some aspect of their success, of their individual success, achievement or happiness, as more important than caring for other people. And I want you to pause and consider that for a moment, because one of the cases that I'm going to make to you is the degree to which we have elevated individual success, hyper-individualism, and demoted or sidelined caring for other people may be unprecedented in our history. When we ask parents, what do you value most in your children, caring, happiness, achievement? What they said is, what's most important to us, to parents, is that my kids are caring. They ranked achievement quite low. But as I mentioned, we asked youth, how do you perceive your parents' priorities? Do you think your parents prioritize caring, happiness, and achievement? And this is what they said. So they're more likely to think that their parents prioritize achievement and happiness than they prioritize achievement and happiness. About 57% of students said they thought their parents would prioritize achievement first. Who's responsible? So one way we just thought to try and get at this question is we asked parents, how do you perceive other parents in your community's child raising priorities? Do you think other parents in your community prioritize caring, happiness, or achievement? And this is what we found, that while parents say they value caring most, they think other parents in their community value achievement and happiness much more than caring. So in a way, the problem is that a great majority of parents think the problem is a great majority of other parents, that as parents, we are not taking responsibility for this. So I think there's a rhetoric-reality gap. There's a gap between, in our schools and in our homes, the messages that we're sending day to day to kids and what we believe or what we espouse. And I think in my own home, I've been aware of that I sometimes didn't require my kids to reach out to other kids on the playground, and I was prioritizing their happiness. They might be working on homework or preparing for a test. I didn't require them to stand up and be polite to my friends occasionally because I was concerned about their achievement. A lot of achievement talk at the dinner table. Then all in the water, in all these ways, we can prioritize our kids' happiness and achievement over their caring for other people. I was interviewing a couple and they were deciding whether they should let their daughter stay on the soccer team. And the mother said, let her quit. She's not having any fun anymore. And the father said, but she's a really good soccer player and it's going to help her get into a selective college. And I realized at some point that neither of them asked the question, does she have some responsibility for the team? And I don't think we are regularly telling kids they have responsibility for their classrooms as communities, for their schools as communities, for their neighborhoods as communities, for they're religiously affiliated, for their faith-based communities as communities. Just want to be clear that there are some big differences across race, culture, and class in what I'm describing. That in many African American communities, many Latino communities, there is a strong sense of the collective, and a sense of collective empowerment. When immigrant kids get to this country across almost every immigrant group, they are doing better than their non-immigrant American peers on almost every moral and emotional measure. They're less likely to be delinquent, to have behavior problems. They're more likely to get good grades. And there's this idea out there on the airwaves that immigrant families are a threat to America's moral culture. But what the data seem to suggest is that it's America's moral culture that's a threat to immigrant kids. The longer immigrant kids are here and across the generations, the worse they start to do on all of those emotional and moral measures. And by the third generation, they tend to be doing as bad or worse than their non-immigrant American peers. So how do we get here? Why this change in the values that we prioritize? It used to be mother's primary responsibility through most of our history. It was mother's responsibility. It should have been father's responsibility too, to raise kids to be good citizens. That was mother's primary responsibility. That is no longer what most mothers in this country, and there are variations, think of as their primary responsibility, or fathers think of this as their primary responsibility. Again, most, certainly not all, but most. Schools in this country, public schools, but also independent schools, were almost entirely founded to cultivate in children the capacities they needed to be good citizens, to be caring and respectful family members, colleagues at work, collaborators at work, and good citizens. That is no longer the primary function of most public schools in this country or most independent schools in this country. Colleges, including our own, including Harvard, were founded to promote ethical character in men. It should have been ethical, it should have been ethical character in women as well. Um, Harvard was not alone. Almost all colleges in this country were founded to promote ethical character, and that's been true through most of our history. When I ask people inside and outside Harvard, and I've surveyed Harvard undergrads about this, when I ask them what Harvard stands for, some of them say excellence, some of them say advancement, some of them say elitism, some of them say privilege, but fairly infrequently do I hear a moral value. And that is a big problem that our schools and our colleges and universities no longer stand for ethical values. I want to say something about religion, and I just want to say that I'm not making a case for or against religion. And particularly, I'm not making a case for a religious ideology, a particular religious ideology or religious text. But I do want you to think about the functions of religion. And I'm going to mention this a couple times in this talk about the functions of religion, that in some of the structures of religion, religions are commonly communities where adults stand for moral values, where adults are engaging children in moral questions, where there are rituals of gratitude, where people are asked to think about what they owe others, where there's a fusion of a moral and a spiritual life, where there's a sense that you have responsibility for your ancestors and that you have responsibility for your descendants, where there are coming of age ceremonies, where young people are asked to consider what their responsibilities are for their communities. And again, I am not suggesting we become more religious. I am suggesting that we think about how can we reproduce some of these key aspects of religion and secular life? How might we have things like coming of age ceremonies in our schools where young people are asked to think about their responsibilities for their communities, for their responsibilities, how to honor their ancestors, how to honor their descendants. I'm going to come back to this too, because I think it's very related to meaning and purpose as well. So here's the irony. I don't think all this focus on happiness achievement is making people happier, kids happier, and I don't think it's making them achieve at a higher level. And the data on achievement is pretty clear that too much achievement pressure, kids can actually deplete kids' capacity to achieve. And young people start to achieve at diminished levels, at lower levels. But many other things that I think are going on here. When we're hyper focused on our kids' happiness, for example, I think sometimes we swoop in to resolve minor peer conflicts. We have an allergy to them experiencing adversity of any kind. We maneuver to get them on winning teams in sports. But in all these ways, we are robbing kids of precisely those coping strategies that are going to be important for their long-term well-being. I also just want to comment on something that I see when my kids were growing up, and I sometimes see when I'm in playgrounds around here, and it's the amount of talk about our kids' moment-to-moment feelings. That sometimes I'm in a playground and I hear parents saying to their kids every 10 minutes, that must make you frustrated, that must make you sad, that must make you angry. And I want to be really clear about this. It's really important to get kids to identify and articulate their feelings. I'm a psychologist, I believe in this. It's very important to get boys especially to identify and articulate their feelings. But I'm worried about the frequency with which we're doing this. I worry that it's causing kids to turn their inner lives into theater, to make their feelings too important sometimes and too precious. And that we would do better on a playground tuning into other kids' feelings and helping our kids tune into other kids' feelings. And if they can tune into other kids' feelings, they're going to be better friends. They're going to be better romantic partners. They're going to be better mentors. They're going to be better colleagues. They're going to be better parents. And those relationships, being appreciated by people you appreciate, people who know and value you, are the most durable and robust sources of happiness that we have. So the case that I'm making to you is this hyper focus on kids' moment-to-moment feelings can in fact make them less happy. And if we focus them more on caring in, tuning into, empathizing with other people, they would have the foundation for the relationships that are far more likely to lead to durable and robust robust well-being and a meaningful life. One big caveat on all this. While I think that if children are caring and empathic, they're more likely to be happy, I don't think we should tell kids to be caring because it will make them happy. And here's what I mean by this. So when my kids were young, I would sometimes tell them that they needed to pass the ball because then other kids would pass the ball back to them, or to be nice to other kids because then other kids would be nice to you. There are books now that are saying be caring because it will make you healthier, or be caring because it will make you happier. And there are a couple of problems with this. One is that morality, by definition, sometimes requires sacrifice. Sometimes we need to do things that we don't want to do that can be painful and costly to us. Standing up for an important cause, standing up to another person who is being bullied or ostracized in some ways. Those things can be painful for us. They don't make us happy, but we should do them anyway. The other problem with this is that it still makes happiness the goal. It doesn't make caring the goal. That when I say pass the ball because other kids will pass the ball back to you, it still makes my child's happiness the goal. And I think we should tell kids to be caring, to do what's right because it's right, to be moral because it's moral, not because it's going to make them happy. I think that's the road for us to a truly moral society in a meaningful sense. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about the second problem, the lack of meaning and purpose. And then I'm going to take a break and I want to hear questions you have about these problems. And then again, I will talk some about solutions. So here was the alarming thing, that Making Caring Common, which is the initiative I direct here at the Harvard Ed School, conducts national surveys. We've been conducting surveys on mental health, we've been conducting surveys on loneliness, and we've been conducting surveys on meaning and purpose. And one of the things that we found in our last two surveys in 2023 and 2022 is that an alarming percentage of young people report lacking meaning and purpose in their lives. 58% of young people, 18 to 25, reported experiencing little or no meaning and purpose in their lives. When we asked this question to 20 to 30-year-olds, we similarly got a high number, about 54%. 44% reported not mattering to other people, or mattering a little or not, mattering only a little or not at all to other people. And young adults were also the most likely to be lonely, about a third. Loneliness is very hard to measure, but it looks like about a third of young people are lonely. And we worry about senior citizens being lonely in our data, and this is good. These are good national rigorous surveys. Senior citizens are the least likely to be lonely. And I'm not saying we shouldn't be concerned about senior citizens. Young adults are by far the most likely to be lonely, 20 to 40, that age range, which includes parents. So this is really concerning, was really concerning to us. And I've been fussing a lot, thinking about like what is going on here and what is driving this. And the costs are high. This is Viktor Frankl in Man's Search for Meaning, quoting Nietzsche, those who have a why to live can endure almost any how. I mean, this is at the core of resilience, having meaning and purpose. And we also know that meaninglessness, dystopia, purposelessness are very connected: anxiety, depression, and addiction. They're highly correlated in our data too. Meaninglessness and purposelessness, anxiety, and depression are highly correlated. And young people aged 18 to 25 are also suffering the highest rates of anxiety and depression. We have this idea out there, there's a teen mental health crisis, and I worry about teens, but young adults are suffering anxiety and depression at about twice the rate of teenagers are. This is the population in many ways we should be most concerned about. And I think the lack of meaning and purpose is a big reason why. Here are some thoughts about what is going on here. One of the ways in which I think the lack of morality and the lack of meaning and purpose are connected is that I think hyper-individualism and the demotion of caring and morality has deprived people of one of our most powerful sources of meaning and purpose, and that is not just focusing on self-advancement, not just focusing on advancing the self, but caring for others, caring for the common good, advancing the common good. And I don't think we send, as I said, powerful messages to kids that is a wonderful way and a deeply meaningful way to lead a life, to be in service, to care for other people. In our data, achievement and financial pressure are also very high. They're what young people identify as the most negative influences on their mental health. And in our interviews, a lot of young people say, I'm so focused on achievement, or I'm so focused on making a living that it's really hard for me to think about meaning and purpose. Meaning and purpose has, in a sense, been squeezed out of my life. The transactional nature of work. A lot of young people are not investing their identity or meaning in work because they feel like work is transactional. They're in a startup culture, for example, where corporations are starting and ending very quickly. They don't feel like there's any loyalty to them. I certainly understand this feeling of not wanting to invest in these companies that don't seem to be loyal to you. Young people are also starting families at later ages, and that may be a piece of this. And I mentioned religion in the context of morality, but I also think it's a huge issue in the context of meaning and purpose, that religions often assign people a meaning. They are often places where people are engaged in service, where there's a meta story, a story about your relation to your ancestors and descendants, a story about your position in space and time that is meaningful, where there are structures for dealing with grief and loss that provide meaning. So again, I'm not advocating we should suddenly become more religious, but I think we should think about these structures of religion, wonder and awe, the sacred, and how to reproduce these aspects of religion in secular life. Loneliness is also, as I said, very high among young people. And when you ask people across the ages, where do you get most meaning and purpose? About 80% in our sample are most likely to say, if you ask them an open-ended question, relationships. So that loneliness is so high is very concerning. Social media and technology certainly making many people lonely, or the sort of the presence of absence in social media, but also the constant comparisons with other people, the relative sense that other people have more friends than you. All of these things can deepen loneliness and deplete meaning and purpose in people's lives. But I want to be clear, the research on social media is really complicated, and it really seems to say that it's not the primary driver of mental health problems, and that the impact of social media depends. It depends on how much you use it, what you're using, what your prior vulnerabilities are. I want to share a thought about the self-help and therapeutic culture, which is related to my earlier point about the kind of mood meteorologist that is going on playgrounds. And, I think the advent of the therapeutic culture in the last 40 years, I'm trained as a therapist, has helped millions of people. I also think this is the most psychologically articulate generation of young people, maybe in our history, maybe in the history of humankind. The vocabulary that young people have for talking about things like anxiety and depression may be unprecedented. And I think this is the generation of young people that might finally break the stigma around mental health. And that is a wonderful thing. But I also worry about the downsides of this. I worry that it has caused people to turn inward to find meaning, and that the self by itself, quoting Martin Seligman, or I'm sort of adapting a Martin Seligman quote, the self by itself is a poor site for meaning. I worry about this turning inward to find meaning rather than the turning to community to find meaning, the turning to service to find meaning. Let me just also say that one of the things we may be seeing in this data, which could be a very good thing, is that young people have higher expectations for having meaning and purpose in their life. So when they're reporting lacking meaning and purpose, it's because they want more from their relationships, or they want more from their work, from their jobs. And that's a good thing. And just to share one final thought, I don't think, a lot of young people now, and a lot of my students are struggling with what to do with their lives. I find more and more of my students are struggling with these questions about what to do with my life and what will give me the most meaning and purpose. And I think we have maybe gone too far to one side on this, that we have been reluctant to assign meaning to children and young people because we want them to make choices. but it's hard to fully make choices without assigned meanings. And just to clarify what I mean by this, I think that we could be telling young people, if you really learn how to love other people, if you're able to provide for yourself and for your family, if you're exercising citizenship, those are very important sources of meaning. That is a good life. You may find a purpose or a passion, but even if you don't do those things, if you care and if you love and if you work well, those are fundamental to a meaning of life, and that is meaningful, and we should be assigning meaning to it. Let me just also clarify that I think there are dangers of a single purpose framing, that a lot of young people I talk to, a lot of people in our interviews, they feel like if they don't have a passion or if they don't have a calling or a mission, that they're defective in some way, that there's something wrong with them. But Bill Damon's research says that only about 15% of young people have a single purpose, a kind of engine that drives their lives. And I don't think for most of us, it's really the right way to think about it, that we can somehow burrow into ourselves and find this passion or this calling or this engine that will organize and drive our entire lives. I think for most of us, it's important to find out what we care about, how that aligns with career opportunities. What we care about might change, those career opportunities might change, our experience in those careers will change. This is a very dynamic, fluid process for most of us. So I think our goal as parents, as educators, has to be in helping young people distill what they care about, but also in how it aligns with the world, but also sending the message it doesn't have to be a single parent purpose. It can be something that is fluid and dynamic and changes your entire life. If you are self-aware and able to talk to others, you can find things throughout your life that give you deeper meaning and purpose. Okay, I want to turn to solutions, but let me just pause there because I would love, and I'm going to stop sharing for a minute because I would love to hear any questions or comments that you have. I will read a few out loud. It feels almost countercultural to value purpose and meaning in a society where many around us assign status and worth based on money or achievements. How do you deal with exposure to these conflicting cultural messages about the importance of money and achievement in your personal life? So it's a great question. And the case I am making to you is that we are off course as a society. And the reason we are off course is because we have been overvaluing achievement and money and undervaluing ethical character. And what I'm saying also is that that is not a foreign idea or a strange idea. Through most of our history, in fact, we did put ethical character front and center in our homes, in our schools, in our colleges, in our faith-based institutions. And I am making the case to you that we've got to get back to ethical character. I don't think what we meant by ethical character then will be the same as what we mean by ethical character now. And I think by ethical character now, I think we need to be much more mindful of people who are different in race, class, culture, subject, gender orientation, sexual orientation, what it means to be ethical in this world. But I think we need to get back to it. That's the case I'm making. Second question, when I ask adolescents what they want to do when they grow up, they often respond they want to make a lot of money, or they respond with something they saw from media sources, for example, influencer or fashion designer. Considering this and the effect of modernity on identity development, in contrast to identity development in pre-modern societies, in light of the identity work by Erikson and Frankl, what would you recommend to educators who are trying to counter society's negative influence and trying to provide support and positive influences for today's youth? This is a great question, and it's the subject of the last 10 minutes or so of my talk. So I'm gonna punt on this question and return to it in a few minutes because I am going to talk about things that we can do that I think will help cultivate care for others and a commitment to the larger good. So the third question is very close to my heart. These are all great. These are great questions. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get to all of them. How do we help young people identify what counts as happiness and also what counts as moral in the realm of sexual relationships and romance, when cultural norms offer few substantive answers to these questions beyond what you enjoy? So I'm not sure this is quite answering your question, but I teach a course in the spring called On Becoming a Good Person and Leading a Good Life. It's on morality, love, hope, and purpose. And on the section on romantic love is very much about the ethics of love and sexuality. And I am making a case for a couple of things. One is that we have failed epically to prepare young people for romantic love. That we do almost nothing. You know, Freud said the two most important things in life are work and love. We do almost a lot to prepare young people for work. Whether we do it well or not is another question. We do almost nothing to prepare them for the gentle, subtle, tender, disciplined, generous work of really learning how to love somebody else. And that this needs to be part of how we educate in our English classes, in our history classes, in our social studies classes, and in sex ed, care and ethics in romantic relationships. And how do you love somebody deeply and well? And how do you enter a deep reciprocal and mutual love relationship? Should be something that should be much more central. It's This is all uphill because sex education in this country is pretty much abstinence or disaster prevention in most parts of the country. And it's often 3 weeks and it's taught by somebody with no training or no support. So I think we really need to focus on what high quality sex ed looks like. It should also be about respect and care in love, not just about sex ed. This is going to be uphill. This is a hard battle. But I think it'll be easier to talk about care and respect and love than to talk about some of the issues around sex in many communities. I have a much longer answer, but I should stop there. Let me just answer one more question. I'm sorry I'm not going to be able to get to all of them, but I do want to share some thoughts with you about moving forward, and we will have some time at the end for questions as well. In traditional societies, rituals play a key role in preparing young people to lead moral and meaningful lives. What role, if any, does ritual formation need to play to support teens and young people in today's Western societies? I really appreciate this question. So I am making the case that one of the things that is powerful about religious communities are rituals, rituals like coming of age ceremonies, but also rituals of gratitude, and that we should really be thinking about how to recreate those rituals in secular life. Things like blessings around the dinner table, talking about who you appreciate and why, a few times a week or every night a week. There's a religious way to do that, but there's also a secular way to do this. In our schools, we should be talking about gratitude and having rituals of gratitude. So I think this point is super important. So here are some thoughts about, how to move forward. How do we actually can work to prepare children and young people for moral and meaningful lives? So the first recommendation I have is it's a question in part that I want to raise for all of us is how do we create a culture of caring and service? I am a great believer in national service. I think we should have national service in this country. I think that if we get young people working together on problems, not doing for people in marginalized or underrepresented communities, but doing with people across the income spectrum, across race, class, and culture, it serves a number of purposes. It's part of developing a moral life. It can give people a sense of meaning and purpose. It can help bridge divides in this country. It's a response to loneliness. For all kinds of reasons, I think we need to be thinking about service. And I'm not just talking about national service, important as that is. I'm talking about creating a culture of service in our workplaces, in our K-12 schools, in our community organizations, that we can all be encouraging caring and service, and especially collective caring and service that brings together diverse people. And by diverse people, I mean in terms of race, ethnicity, but also in terms of political orientation. Reproducing key aspects of religion and secular life. And again, this is a question I want to raise for you. Things like coming of age ceremonies in high school, rituals of gratitude, but also how can we create a sense in our community institutions that we are part of a larger human project? We are part of communities. We have responsibilities for our ancestors and descendants. And you can imagine things like reimagining public libraries. So there are places where there is arts, where there is history, where there is civic engagement, where there's poetry, where there's storytelling, where there's music that can help recreate a sense of the sacred, that can help us feel wonder and awe, that can help us feel connected to the generations before us and the generations after us. The repurposing of our churches, going on in San Francisco, it's going on in other cities too, that underutilized religious facilities can also be used to create new spaces that help do these things. Centering care and morality in child raising. Again, I think we are too focused on achievement and happiness and not focused enough on care and morality. Very concretely, what if as parents, rather than saying to our kids, the most important thing is that you're happy, what if we said to them, the most important thing is that you're kind? William James allegedly said on his deathbed, there are three things that are most important in life. The first is to be kind, the second is to be kind, and the third is to be kind. Let me also just say that by centering care and morality, I also mean weaving it into our families' lives day to day so that uh, doing chores is part of our family's life. There's a debate about whether kids should do chores or not. Always really surprises me. In my mind, of course, kids should do chores. This is our family. We pitch in, we help each other. We help our neighbors. We engage in service. We engage in service occasionally as a family. This is our family identity, that we care for other people. I cannot emphasize how crucial I think this is, both for kids' well-being and for the health and well-being of our communities and our society. Caring across difference, hard caring, and expanding children's circle of concern. I think almost everybody, we talk about empathy and care sometimes as if they're quantities, as if you have a certain amount or certain capacity for caring or for empathy. But, and the amount of empathy we have, sometimes we talk about a muscle too. The strength we have, the amount we have is certainly important, but in many ways, almost all of us care for somebody. Almost all of us care for somebody quite a lot, for our family members or for close friends. The much bigger issue in many ways is, who do we have empathy and care for? Do we have empathy for the bus driver, for the school secretary, for the custodian? Do we have empathy for people who are different from us in race or class or gender or sexual orientation? Do we have empathy for people who don't share our political views? Or are we at least able to engage those people constructively? These are the hard forms of caring and empathy. And I don't feel like we're demanding from our kids or ourselves often these harder forms of caring and empathy. But I think the goal here can't just be developing empathy, it has to be expanding children's circle of concern to include those people who may be off their radar, but also people who are different in race, class, gender, sexual orientation, but also political party. And I'm going to come back to this. That doesn't mean we agree with people who don't share our political views. We may fiercely disagree with them, but it is working toward finding shared humanity in our interactions with people who are different from us. Teaching basic principles of justice and human rights. So my kids, I'm sort of returning in a sense to my last point, but I want to connect it to this point. My kids went to the Cambridge Public Schools. I think they got a terrific education in the Cambridge Public Schools. I love many of their teachers, but I don't think they ever heard a solid position for a conservative point of view. And I do think we need to expose our kids to multiple perspectives and multiple points of view. But I also think that we have to keep front and center basic principles of justice and human rights. You can be pro-life and you can be pro-choice. There's a moral case for both of those positions. You can have many positions about immigration that have a moral basis, but you can't denigrate or wildly stereotype immigrants. That's a violation of human rights and a principle of justice. You can't separate parents and children at the border. That's a violation of human rights and a fundamental principle of justice. So while we have to teach our kids to talk across the aisle, so to speak, to talk to people who don't share their political views, I also think we have to always keep front and center these principles of justice and of human rights. So let me just share with you a few key takeaways, and then I'd like to return to your questions again. One of the main cases that I'm making to you is that there is nothing more important than raising children and young people in our colleges, in our preschools, in our K-12 systems who care about others and the common good. That we are imperiled because we have lost this focus, and we will flourish as a society if we can keep this focus. I don't know where we are going as a society if we keep fueling and reinforcing this hyper-individualism. I also want to make the case to you that at the heart of this work is cultivating children's capacity to care for those who are different from them in race, class, culture. And in addition to what I've already said, I want to just emphasize that that is the foundation for justice. That if we can take the perspectives of people who are different from us in our community in all kinds of ways, different from us, then we can represent their interests in decisions about fairness and justice. And I think that's where we need to go, is how can we most effectively represent the diversity of perspectives in our communities in decisions about fairness and justice. So carrying across difference, I think, is at the heart of justice, of young people understanding what it is and young people being motivated to pursue justice. And I also finally am making the case that preparing children and young people to lead moral lives is also key to rebuilding our society and is a powerful source of meaning and purpose. That in our focus on the self rather than on giving to other people, we have lost a very important source of meaning and purpose. I want to just share one caveat about that, and that's that there are many people who are giving too much. I teach the giving tree in my class too. And, the giving tree is an example of, in this case, it's a mother who gives so much to her child and she ends up depleted, a stump. The child ends up entitled and narcissistic. There are many ways to interpret the giving tree. But when I say that we should focus on caring for other people, I'm talking generally. I'm not talking about individuals. For many individuals, and I think primarily for girls, and but for some boys too, being able to assert yourself, being mindful of your own needs is very important. So I think attention to differences around this is also important. All right, I want to just encourage you to join our Making Caring Common Cause. You can look at our website. You can contact me if you're interested in getting involved in some way. And I'd love for you to join in the work in helping us raise children who care about others and our communities and a better world. All right, let me stop there. I'm going to stop sharing, and I will return to lots of questions in the chat, in the Q&A. Did your survey ask about climate catastrophe? We did not ask about not explicitly about climate catastrophe. One of our surveys we did, actually, ask about climate catastrophe, and was on something like, if I can check for you if you email me, 40 or 50% of teens, young, and around similar percentage of young people said it was a negative influence on their mental health. This was a survey that asked about various negative influences on your mental health. A higher percentage, we also asked a question about whether a sense that the world is falling apart is negatively influencing your mental health. And that was ranked very high, like 60 or 70%. And that may include climate catastrophe in the sense that the world is falling apart. So that's at least a tentative answer to your question. Eric, you asked the question, doesn't meaning and purpose come later in life? I thought that got developed in the context of life. I appreciate the way you phrase this. So I think some people find a mission or calling quite early in their life. And, but as Bill Damon was saying in his research, it's not a high number. It's, 15% of college students. But, I know people, my guess is, people who from a fairly early age did have a calling or a mission. And I think that's great. I just don't think most of us are built that way. And that for most of us, it's much more of an iterative process and we are discovering it as we go along, and it's fluid and changing as we go along. So I think for some people, meaning and purpose, certainly purpose, can come early in life. And for some of us, a driving purpose comes later. Meaning, I think, can happen at every stage of life. I mean, I hope all of us in different ways are finding meaning at every stage of our life. You mentioned that the priority on caring versus individual achievement or happiness has decreased over time. What do these longitudinal trends look like, and do they track with notable societal shifts? Great question. We don't have data on exactly this, longitudinal studies on how parents or kids are prioritizing caring, achievement, or happiness. But we do know, from the data, you can sort of infer a few things. One is that, in times in the 1950s, early 1960s, in times where the economy seems to be doing well, there is a heightened focus on individual happiness. So I think that's part of what began this trend. The self-esteem movement also, I think, powerfully affected this trend. The self-esteem movement was telling us that if you feel good about yourself, you're more likely to be virtuous, you're more likely to be happy, you're less likely to, a California council declared that if you had self-esteem, you were less likely to abuse drugs, to be delinquent. The self-esteem was sort of the answer to every problem under the sun. And the self-esteem movement is still with us to some extent. And I think that has been part of this focus on happiness and part of the constant praising of kids. So I think that has been a factor in this as well. I think the decline in religion has been a factor. I think the psychotherapy culture over the last 30 or 40 years has been a factor. So I think there are a number of factors that have acted together in ways that have fueled hyper-individualism and fueled this focus on the self. The media ecosystem and the worshiping of celebrity has certainly also fueled this as well. Can you talk some about gender differences and how young people approach caring and empathy? So I did, I think, address gender differences to some degree. But I don't want to fall into, and there's gender fluidity too. I don't want to fall into the binary of there just being boys and girls. And I also don't want to stereotype girls or boys. But I think there are some things that are important to attend to here. I do think that there are things, when you think about caring and empathy, one of the other things that's sort of misleading about thinking about them as a muscle or a quantity is that often when parents, adults, kids are not caring and empathic, it's because something is getting in the way. And I do think there are things about boy culture, about masculine culture that have been written about extensively that can get in the way. Things about the importance of being strong, of being a protector, of self-advancement that can get in the way of boys experiencing empathy or showing feeling or being in touch with their own feelings, which is important for caring and empathy. I think the word empathy has become feminizing in many circles. And I say that from working with the National Guard and other circles. And so I do think there are gender differences in this that are important to pay attention to. That is not in any way to say that boys, men can't be caring and empathic. They often are. And this is something we all, that's important for all of us to be working on. I also want to say that when we talk about empathy, we're not just talking about perspective taking, that con men and torturers and salespeople are very good at perspective taking. They have cognitive empathy. When we're talking about what I think of as real and meaningful empathy, we're talking about empathy that has a cognitive component. You can take another perspective, but it also has an emotional component. You can experience what other people are feeling, and a moral component, which is that you value other people. And I do feel generally speaking, that girls are more likely to have the affective aspect of empathy, the ability to tie their feelings to other people's feelings, to experience other people's feelings. It doesn't have to be true. I think that's how they are socialized primarily. How do we balance telling kids or young adults or even ourselves that we need to be more caring and practice caring for others when other influences of the world do not seem to ultimately care about us? Well, this is a sobering question. I don't, and I wish we were in person because we could have a conversation about this. But there are lots that's uncaring in our, I feel like there's a lot that's uncaring in our world. I think there's a lot that's caring in our world. It depends, what we are attending to and what we're able to absorb in a point in time. And I think that this is something that's really important for us not to be passive about and for us not to let our kids be passive about. That if we want a caring world, we have to build it and we have to model it for them and we have to expect it from them and we have to help them develop the skills to do it. And um, so I'm really big on not just talking the talk, but walking the walk about this. In terms of kids becoming caring people too, and I forgot to say this, what we model is super important for them, and not just modeling caring, but modeling caring for people that are different from us, modeling caring when it's hard, expanding our own circle of concern. What is the role of teachers in shaping these values for young adults? What concrete tactics could they use? Can they impact young people's worldviews, especially for 16 to 18-year-olds? So let me just mention a few things. I think this is a big question. It's a really important question. Making Caring Common has a Caring Schools network where we work with schools, high schools and middle schools, on cultivating caring. So I encourage you to look at our website. We have lots of resources for doing this. One of the things is one of the tactics is listening. It's getting kids practice in listening and asking questions, helping to build empathy. So you are listening, you're asking questions, you're checking for understanding, you're practicing reading facial expressions, you're practicing distilling what people are feeling and repeating it back to them, mirroring it back to them and seeing if you're accurate or not. I mean, there are tools that we can give kids to help them build empathy. We can also be engaging them in conversations about fairness and justice and loyalty and honesty. My experience is that young people love to have these conversations. They love to think through moral dilemmas of different kinds, particularly around romantic relationships. What if your friend is cheating on someone who is also your friend? What are your responsibilities in that situation? Young people this is what Shakespeare was writing about. Young people are very interested in engaging in those conversations. So the asking of moral questions is one thing that we can do. Facing History is a terrific organization that asks young people to look at history and the lessons from history for how people pursue justice, how people challenge injustice. Those are there are curriculum out there that can be very important. So this is a wonderful question. It's a very big and an important question too. All right, I think I have time for maybe one more question. What can we do in universities and schools to help students discover their purpose and how best to contribute to society? So I partly, I think, answered this already, but I am teaching this course on becoming a good person and leading a good life, and there's a reason that I'm teaching it. I think there is a hunger among undergraduates and graduate students for these kind of courses. So at the university level, I think we should be having courses that enable young people to explore what makes a meaningful life, what will give them purpose. Bates College has all kinds of tools and strategies for helping young people find meaning and purpose in their lives. There should be places on campuses where young people are not just getting career advice, but they're able to ask questions about meaning and purpose, and they're able to get provisional thoughts from older adults and peers about what has given them meaning and purpose and their process for distilling or finding meaning and purpose. Advising on college campuses. We really need to prepare advisors to engage teens and young people about creating meaning and purpose in their lives. So, and in the high school level, there's also a lot to do, including talking about the why, not just soldiering through a curriculum, but why are we learning what we're learning and how might that be connected to goals that you care about? Those are really important conversations to have with high school students. So I think that is part of what we need to be doing with high school students as well. So there are a lot of other ways to think about this. Um, the final question was about what can be done at international level. We are doing some international work, but a lot of the problems I'm describing are certainly happening in other Western industrialized countries as well. I think there is a lot of opportunity here for collaboration and for international work. Uh, I think that we have run out of time. My clock says 6 o'clock. So thank you all. Be in touch if I can be helpful. And I hope that we can find some ways to continue this conversation and to continue the work.
Thank you, Rick, and thank you all for joining us tonight. We hope you'll join us for more signature events in the future. Information on upcoming events, as well as recordings of past ones, can be found at vpal.harvard.edu/vpal events. Thank you and have a wonderful evening.